Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll begin shortly. Give everyone a chance to connect to all. All right. Welcome to the Small Business Organizing and Advocacy in San Francisco event, hosted by the Office of Economic and Workforce Development and produced by the virtual outreach team of the COVID Command Center. Some housekeeping event for today's event. Today's event is being recorded and is being streamed live on Facebook and YouTube. We respect all participants in this convening today and want to create a safe space for all. By default, all participants will be muted and the video will be disabled, with video being on for our speakers only. If you would like to participate in Q&A, please select the chat button at the bottom of your screen to send your question. And now I hand the floor over to Dylan to speak about our SF relief grants. Dylan, floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. The city has made available financial resources to help small businesses who have been impacted by the pandemic and can show loss of revenue. These are for storefront businesses, the two most recent grants, the community anchor grants and the storefront equity grants. Both applications are currently live, so we encourage you to please go to oewd.org/COVID-19 to see more resources and apply for these grants. We also encourage you to reach out to our small business hotline, the information for which is at oewd.org. President Leguana, over to you.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Today, we're going to be talking about business advocacy and organizing, which is the kind of the centerpiece of most of our lives right now, running small businesses in the middle of the pandemic. So we got this great panel. All of these people are just absolutely extraordinary, basically certified masters at small business advocacy and organizing. So I'm really excited to have them. I am going to introduce each of you, and if you could just please tell the folks who you are. And I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Sharky Leguana. Yes, that is my real name. I am the president of the San Francisco Small Business Commission. I'm a small business owner. I own a company called Bandigo Van Rentals. We rent vans to the music industry. So the pandemic has pretty much been a complete shit show from top to bottom, but still here thanks to lots of loans and grants and trying to stay alive as much as we can. And then just a quick moment again for the audience. You're welcome to post questions and comment and chat. I'll be reviewing them as they come in, and we'll do my best to incorporate that into the panelist discussion. So with that, let's introduce folks, and I think I'll just try to do this in alphabetical order. Ben Blyman, tell us all about you.
Hey, everyone. I am Ben Blyman. I've owned 11 bars in San Francisco, and I'm also have had events companies, and I'm in the cannabis retail business. So we have some dispensaries in town. I was responsible for organizing the bar owners in San Francisco into a group where we've actually become one of the more active industries in the city. We have about 470 individual bar owners in what we call the San Francisco Bar Owner Alliance. It's a very active group of Facebook users. I'm also the chairman of a group called CMAC, California Music and Culture Association, which is the trade association that represents nightclubs and music venues and festivals in San Francisco. It's kind of like the GGRA, but for nightclubs. Finally, I'm currently the president of the San Francisco Entertainment Commission. I must note that anything I say are my own views and not theirs. I'm not speaking for the public body. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I should say that as well. All of us that are here as commissioners are speaking as individuals, not on behalf of the commissions. Thanks, Ben. Desi Denganan, I hope I pronounced that your last name right. Please correct me if I didn't.
No, you got it right. Thanks for having me. My name is Desi. I run a nonprofit economic development agency called Cultivate Labs. We do a lot of our work in the Filipino cultural district, Soma Pilipinas. One of our more well-known programs is Undiscovered SF, a huge Filipino night market that was put on hold because of the pandemic. But recently we organized our merchant community for a campaign called Filipinos Feed the Front Lines, where we raised $150,000 to generate 15,000 meals, where we then distributed that money to help the restaurants in our community stabilize their revenue, and then work with our partner nonprofit organizations to distribute that food.
That's amazing. Cynthia Huey, my fellow small business commissioner.
Hi, everybody. This is like my first time talking this morning, really, except to my kids. So I may start out a little rusty, but my name is Cynthia Huey, and I serve as a small business commissioner. Let's see, I am a small business owner. I had a clothing store in the inner Richmond for almost 10 years called Seed Store. And I also run our family oral surgery practice. So I have a deep love of healthcare and dentistry in particular. I served as the president of the Clement Street Merchants Association for many years. We, in that work, we did a lot of, I would say, community organizing as well as the small business organizing. So through that, I also serve on community boards and community organizations such as RAMS, which offers mental health care to our city and regional residents. And so I would consider myself a small business advocate for sure, but also a community advocate. So looking at small business within the lens of how it really can grow communities and become a real source of vitality for communities. And I'm mostly quite interested right now in serving and connecting people to resources, especially in our monolingual API communities. I think those are some of my current interests, but always open to just supporting small business owners and communities throughout the city. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome, thanks for coming. And last but not least, certainly, I want to say Commissioner Ortiz Cartagena, because that's what we always say in meetings, but William Ortiz Cartagena, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sharky. My name is William Ortiz Cartagena. I'm a Mission District native. I'm too a commissioner for the Office of Small Business, but I also serve as the chair for the subcommittee of small businesses for the Latino Task Force. And what we do is advocate and bring equity to Latinx businesses throughout the city in San Francisco. And like my fellow colleague, Cynthia Huey, I serve on several nonprofit boards, and along with being a multiple small business owner. So really excited to be here with everybody here, and excited for Small Business Week. So go small business.
Awesome. All right. So I think for the panel's discussion, this is going to be the format I'm going to try and stick to, which is I'll pose a question. Each of you will get a chance to respond to that question. I'll just pick people at randomly, so it's not always the same person starting each and every question. But somebody gets to be in the hot seat. And so for this first question, William, I think since we ended with you, we'll start with you. And the question is, talk to us about why advocacy and organizing is important, and how has small business successfully organized in the past?
Well, like everybody always mentions, small business is what makes San Francisco so great and so unique and so eclectic, and makes us want to go to every neighborhood. And advocating for that is not only advocating and important for our small businesses, but it's for the culture of each individual district and the city in whole. And it's very important because, unfortunately, us as small businesses, we're usually in the business operating the small business. So unlike our counterparts in big industry or tech, we don't have somebody that can go out there and advocate on behalf of us. So it's very important for us business owners and community leaders to advocate on behalf of small businesses. And I think it's always been in the spirit of San Francisco to advocate and champion small business. And I think every merchant corridor and every district does it well and does it uniquely. And you can see that, like when they come to our commission hearings, you can see the merchant associations come and advocate for whatever particular issue is affecting their particular corridor. And it's key to the success, and it's important for us to continue to do that and assist our merchants and our small businesses in each corridor throughout the city to be able to advocate. And one thing that COVID did do, and one thing that is a positive, is that via a new vehicle to come to these meetings, businesses no longer have to physically leave their business. They could run real quick, maybe to their back room, hop on their phone, discuss in public comment, and then go rush back to their business. So I think that's the only one of the positive things that did come out the pandemic. So definitely advocating is a way of life in San Francisco.
And I'll just add briefly to that there is a state law that is currently working its way through the assembly right now that will require the state to continue, or require local governments to continue to make it possible to attend meetings virtually. And certainly I think that's really important for the small business community to support that law so that we can continue to participate. So I'm just going to go clockwise on my screen. Desi, talk to me about why advocacy and organizing is important and some ways that you've seen it be successful for small business in the past.
Well, we have this kind of position in our community that the government's not going to help us. So we really have to help ourselves first. Although Zoom is nice to be able to join in commission hearings, it still makes it difficult because you don't actually know when your item is going to go up. So there's still that inaccessibility. And we struggle in our community to get our merchants to come out and try to advocate in City Hall because, there's just been so many barriers to do that. And the way we've been doing it is, sometimes I have to do it, for our community. We assign certain leaders to speak on our behalf, but, that's not really sustainable. But, just like what William was saying, just because it's hard to have our voice heard doesn't mean that we shouldn't go out there and try to make it heard. One of the best ways that we've made our voice heard in the Filipino community is showing the strength of people power, of how many people we can bring out to the streets, either in a protest rally or for our night markets, to show that there is movement and momentum behind our community. And that really kind of wakes people up.
And, I think that's a really important point that you're making about the ability to participate. I think for small businesses, it's always a challenge because they're working. But you bring up what I think is a really critical point, which is with the agendas in these hearings, whether it's commission or board, it's very difficult to know when to show up. And then sometimes how long you're going to be waiting. Certainly that's a challenge that I've encountered as well. Have you guys, have you explored ways to, solve for that problem? Or, maybe what needs to happen is the small business community needs to advocate for a better call-in system or some kind of city text alert or something to that effect where you can sign up and be notified when it's your turn to talk.
We have no solutions. I feel like sometimes the system is rigged where it's designed to only reward those that are patient and persistent.
It does feel like that at times. All right. Well, I'd be certainly interested in working with you on that problem in the future. I think that's something really important to solve for. So we can talk about that offline. Ben Blyman, talk to me about why advocacy and organizing is important and how you've seen small business successfully organized in the past.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. Just because the answer is why is it important is because if we care about small business and if we want it to succeed, it has to be done. We have to advocate. I think way too often, and I'm in the same boat as everybody else, we kind of just expect good things to come to us because we're active members of our community. Small business is helping to employ so many people in the city. I think we're the largest employer. And so we just expect good things to then happen, and for the leaders that we have to make decisions based on that. But that in the last decade, at least, that's not been what's happened. We've seen one after another small, medium, and large policies that have absolutely destroyed our ability to make money, but even break even for most businesses, let alone live a comfortable life in San Francisco. And people think that it was, people act as if it was, circumstances beyond our control, but I kind of reject that statement. I think the small business community had kind of taken that role for granted. And I think our leaders and the population had taken small businesses for granted for decades. And in the face of a changing economy, we didn't get our acts together fast enough, and we paid the price for it. So, you just have to look no further than who the decisions that are made in City Hall and who are they benefiting. And you'll see behind almost every single one of those decisions is a very active group. Take bike lanes all over the city. The Bike Coalition has been incredibly effective. They're organized, and they get what they want for the most part, and they demand more, right? And good for them. The Coalition on Homelessness is another great example, right? They advocate for permanent housing for our unhoused members of our community. And to a T, the City Hall leaders are listening to them, and we need to do the same, and we haven't. When we have done it, it has been mostly in the recent history, and it's been incredibly effective. We saw it with Prop H. Prop H was the first large-scale changes that we've ever seen, I think, to zoning that would actually help small businesses instead of make their lives more miserable. And it was a combined effort of tons of business owners, tons of people around who made it happen. So we need to keep doing it. We need to get more organized with it. And again, to the point that Desi was making, it's much harder for us to find time in our day. If you go to these meetings, it's usually groups have spent a lot of resources organizing and money, or it's people who are generally retired, who just kind of have that time on their hands. And therefore the decisions being made at the leaders level are by a group of people who are retired and groups with lots of money. And we wonder why they happen, right? So we have to do more as a community. We have to, it's harder for us. We just have to suck it up, basically.
All right. Cynthia, same question. Talk to me about why advocacy and organizing is important, and ways that you've seen that work successfully for small business in the past.
It's hard to go last on this one. I think you guys have really covered a lot of, the reasons why we have been challenged in the past. I think because we are 110% in our businesses all day long. And to be able to have any extra time to be able to figure out how to look at the big picture is really challenging. I think in our neighborhood, some of it is, I think, taking it chunk by chunk too, right? Like looking at your own neighborhood and figuring out what could possibly be there, like to dream big within that little neighborhood and see what could actually happen in that space. And that's kind of how I did it, I think. Is I just looked outside of my store and was like, hey, what can we do to make sure neighbors know each other? And we started with a little, with a parklet in front of our shop. And that was the first parklet in the Richmond. And, I just realized that to create the space in order to have community and create conversation was kind of the very first step. And I think in that, we started to recognize the need for more conversation, more community. And that happened within the Merchants Association, creating that space so that merchants could feel safe to talk about what their actual needs were. And we started to kind of, get an understanding of, hey, I'm not the only one who's struggling, because like in our neighborhood, we had this weird thing where once the Google buses and the tech buses came into our neighborhood, a lot of the small business like retail started shifting. We didn't see the same level of sales that we would see, on the weekends, where before it used to be all pretty even because people would, work from home, or they would, they would be around in the neighborhood. But then we saw a big exodus during the weekdays from the neighborhood, and that really shifted our retail environment. And so, but we wouldn't have known that had we not talked to our neighbors. And I think as merchants, we really do need to, organize in order to just see commonalities and patterns. And then that will enable us to be able to be more proactive as we start to gain a voice and the legislation comes before us before it's actually passed. So I think that, during this pandemic, there's been quite a turning point in terms of our own level of engagement and understanding of how to engage. And we haven't really spoken about this yet on this call. Hopefully we'll talk about this soon, but there are a lot of opportunities that I think have presented themselves now to be able to help our communities organize now that we see how important it is. Because yes, we've been very passive, and I don't blame anybody for that. I mean, I think we've all been struggling to keep all of our businesses in a I want to say growth mindset, but just to be able to stay afloat, in the last few years has been very challenging, if not longer. So, yeah.
I think that's a really important point you brought up at the start there about imagining the possibility. And I think that is something that we don't actually do enough of in the city. We have a tendency of looking at things as they are. Sometimes we complain about the way things are, but I don't think, just as collectively as a city, we spend enough time imaginatively thinking about the potential, the opportunity, the positive ways that things could be better. And I think that that's a really great point that you brought up that gets me thinking about, that's one thing that small business owners as entrepreneurs, your job literally, as part of starting the business, you had to envision this thing that didn't exist yet. And maybe that's part of our work, is to envision a city that doesn't exist yet. That's the first step in making that an actuality. I think I started with William, right? So I think I've covered everybody. So, I think that brings me to the next question, which I'm just going to go in reverse order. So Cynthia, you don't have to go after everybody's already spoken this time. What can we be doing to, what can we change positively in terms of how we're organizing and how we're communicating as a community to help effectuate, to help create that next more positive step for the city? How do you see the activism and organizing? How do you see that playing out over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think I don't know if I can get to the next 3 to 5 years necessarily, but a couple of tangible things that I think we could do and that I would like to see in our efforts in organizing is one. I think small business owners are I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but I do think that we are the perfect people to really help this city, be the city that we all do envision it to be and want it to be, because we're resourceful, we're very hardworking, we understand how to look at a problem a million different ways because we have to solve for it. And we're pretty good about talking to our neighbors. I mean, that's generally what we do, in our communities naturally as business owners. And so I think, those kind of qualities, if we could help use those within the city's kind of, areas of need, I think we could solve for a lot of problems and we could solve for a lot of the issues that we're seeing, because I feel what's often missing is kind of that real life perspective, right? Theoretically, things should work this way, but when it comes down to everybody's everyday life, what is actually happening? Am I seeing, people in the community being fed, sheltered, all the things that they need? Are people getting access to healthcare? If it's not happening, then I think we're in a very good position to be able to figure out how to get that happening on the ground. The other piece, so I would say, getting more small business owners involved, finding key people who are really good at what they do and really asking them to just do more in a different direction, perhaps. I know that sounds terrible, but I know we're all stretched, and we just, asking some people who really want to do the help to actually step in and do something, I think is the first step. Then secondly, I think, what we really need to do is come together, maybe collaboratively too, as different groups that have seen, that have built really good networks, really good systems, and start sharing information. I think helping new groups, we've seen a lot of new groups become very active, either from dormancy or from just being new groups over a pandemic. And I think helping a new organization, whether it's a merchants association, neighborhood association, industry sector association, helping them come up so that they're not starting at square zero, but they have a square one and they can build from that, meaning show people, have a toolkit to show people how to get engaged in their community. Who do they need to talk to? What are the city resources? Give them all the basics, and then we can kind of start moving. And I think if we can share those types of foundational things, we shouldn't be we're not in competition with one another. We're all here to support each other. So let's give everybody the same basic blocks and help everybody build from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Great comments. Ben, same question to you. How do we move forward? How do you see this playing out over the next 3 to 5 years? What are some things we can do that are better and smarter?
Yeah, great question again. The first thing I think we need to do is kind of agree on a general, on the diagnosis of what the problems are and what the issues are. And on a macro level, the issue is that the economy in America is changing very quickly and it's moving online. And if we're not careful, small businesses are going to be a collateral damage of that. These online businesses are consolidated and they are ruthless, and they honestly don't care about us and our communities, no matter what their marketing says. One example is that the main investor in Uber Eats, whose predatory practices are preying on small businesses, was also the same person who had an American journalist cut up with a bone saw last year, murdered and cut up with a bone saw. So if we believe that they actually care about our communities, I got a bridge I'll sell you in Brooklyn. So with knowing that, we need to do everything as a community, and from our leadership to our consumers to the citizens, to help our small businesses compete and advance and remain and stay alive in this economy if we care about them. But instead, in the last 10 years, we've done literally the opposite. We have made it much, much, much more expensive, added red tape, made it much harder for small businesses to operate, while simultaneously all of this giant competitive, ruthless companies have gotten more and more efficient and cost less and less to operate. So they've actually put their thumb on the scale for Amazon and for Uber Eats and DoorDash and these companies. And we need to do the opposite. In fact, it's the least progressive thing I can think of that San Francisco has done. And they did it, with good intentions, I think. But the results were really, really destructive to our community. So I've kind of come up with a framework. It's not the definitive framework, but I think it's helpful. It's called the 5 Horsemen of the small business apocalypse. It's 5 categories of things that we need to address as a group. And almost every little measure that we think of can fall into one of these categories. The first is taxes and fees. We're among the highest in America, in San Francisco. We have the highest fees and the highest taxes overall. I believe we're number 1. 2 is permitting and zoning. We are either the worst or in the top 5 of the most onerous, red tape filled practice, where one single person can close down an ice cream shop for years and have them hemorrhage money, and then they don't even open. The third is our employment mandates. We're all progressive, I think. We all believe in living wages and employment mandates. But if the people right over the bay or further away don't have to follow by those rules, but we do, it's just a moral victory for our leaders that puts us at an incredible disadvantage and makes it almost impossible for us to operate in the city. So we need to take a look at those mandates and figure out where the stress point is on our small businesses and what they can handle and what they can't handle. The fourth one is commercial rents. We need to use every tool in our toolbox to make sure that landlords have less leverage over our smaller businesses and small businesses can remain and stay. And the fifth are the conditions on our street, which again are among the worst in the nation. We have issues with cleanliness, we have issues with safety, and these are things that if you poll small business owners, the gross majority of them bring those up in the beginning. So we all need to agree on what the framework is. I don't care if you use my 5 horsemen, I just think it's a catchy thing, but I think everything can kind of fit into those categories. So then it's how do we organize, right? And so, you know, it's funny, I think a lot of small business owners think it's hopeless and helpless. They think, what's the point? And I hate to say this, but they're wrong. It works, and it works really effectively. You just have to do it, right? And so we talk to the leaders. We ask them what works. Guess what? We're not building a nuclear submarine here. We need to call into public comment. We need to send emails and letters to supervisors, and we need to call supervisors. Eventually, we need to work with new supervisorial candidates to find out their positions on small business. But for now, it's all about public comment and emails and reaching out to your supervisors and commissioners and commissions and staff. That's it. It's tricky to do. Like we talked about before, it takes hours sometimes, and you're sitting there and your blood is boiling because somebody's saying something that's not true. And it's really frustrating experience. Luckily, myself and actually Sharky was responsible for this. We put together a website called sfsmallbusiness.com, which is a sign-up sheet for public comment call-in. And we have a texting tree that we can end up very easily text people when public comment is available for issues around small business. So we've used it before, and we're going to be using it again. So anybody listening, if you want to do that, that's one way. There's a million ways to sign up, but that's one that we created that's easy. But we need to do it. We need to do it 5 years ago. Luckily, I think it's being done right now, and I'm actually pretty excited for the future here.
Yeah, that's great. I think I share a sense of optimism there. I see a lot of people organizing and a lot of people talking and willing to do the hard work that I don't think we collectively thought that was possible previously, and the pandemic sort of opened some minds and some eyes, and now we're seeing a lot of conversations that I don't think we've had in the past. So let me turn to you, Desi. Same question. How do you see us moving forward? And you know, I know you've heard what Cynthia and Ben have had to say. Maybe you have something to add on top of that, or some additional observations, or maybe you even disagree with some of the things I said. But the floor is yours, and tell us how you think we should be moving forward.
I'm going to play the pessimist on the panel today. But I think one of the things that we have to understand about working with City Hall is that they have a much different mindset than entrepreneurs. And so before I was in the nonprofit community development arena, I was a small business entrepreneur. I owned a nightclub, a cafe, a co-working space. So, you know, from that experience, I avoided the city because of all the hassles that they would give me. Now I'm in a much different position where I have to work closely with the city to get government grants, get activation areas, so on and so forth. And what I've learned is that they don't think like us as entrepreneurs. They have other motivations that they are trying to check off the box. And so our need to move faster, to move more efficiently, it doesn't really register in City Hall because they're not operating with the same rules that we're operating in entrepreneurship, which is making the numbers balance. And we have a certain a runway of time to make these numbers balance before it's game over. In government, it's not like that. They play with a whole different set of rules. And so one of the things that I've learned in working with city government is what city government hates the most is when they're being slammed, you know, when they're getting a lot of complaints, because that's the bureaucrats' like worst nightmare, because I got to deal with more issues. If you're able to work with City Hall in a way to address the issues in a positive way and then get them the media spotlight that they need, to then when they go into their meetings to show what did you do with your time and investment in these city resources, and they can go and show, hey, well, I did this and this is what the media thinks. And it helps your cause much more if you become an advocate as opposed to a hater of City Hall. And you also have to think in a much longer time scale when working with City Hall. In entrepreneurship, we can make things happen in a couple of weeks. In City Hall, we're working in like fiscal cycles that are really longer timescales than what we're used to in entrepreneurship. We're thinking multi-years as opposed to like, we got to get things done in a quarter. So that's one of the things that we have to realize as entrepreneurs, is that we need to start to think like bureaucrats in City Hall if we're going to make City Hall work for us.
That's a really great point. And I think some of that long-range planning and long-range thinking is certainly an important layer that we need to add on top of our strategic thinking on how we move forward. And I appreciate what you're saying too about working with City Hall being frustrating. I will say there's definitely been a shift since the pandemic in both the tenor and tone of the interactions with City Hall. I think everybody from almost top to bottom has been changed their mindset a bit about the importance of small business and what the city needs to be doing with small business. So I guess I have personally I have a rosier view. Maybe I have to have a rosier view. Maybe I'm just naturally an optimist. But I think you're spot on in that they do think differently. They're coming at it from a different perspective and a different background. And so the burden is on us to educate elected officials on how to make the city work for small businesses.
Can I just throw in a point right here? This is a really good, Desi, that's a really good point. And even if you watch the shared spaces discussion in MTA has a budget of billions of dollars a year. And they have somehow come up with a number, not to begrudge them because this is what they do, but they've come up with a number that the shared space is going to cost them $10 million a year. And they're like, we need to find this money back. And I'm going, wait a second, like you're a non-profit, you're a governmental nonprofit. This is not, I know that you don't want to have to make tough decisions, but the point of a city department is not to find all the money they can find at all times. It's to try to, run as leanly as possible and get the maximum benefit. And, Desi, to your point that, we need every dollar that we make just to stay alive. They're just using billions and billions of dollars with a totally different mindset. So. Yeah,
totally agree. So, William, same question to you. How do we move forward? What are some smart things we can do? How should we be thinking about this as we look at the future that's approaching us?
Well, I want to echo what every panelist has said, and I want to pause right there, because for me, it's also how do we move forward and be equitable, right? Because everything that was just mentioned is just compounded 100 times fold in communities of color, right? If you don't speak the language, if your socioeconomic background doesn't give you the same access. So everything that was just mentioned, we have to make sure that we don't leave the most vulnerable businesses behind, the most eclectic communities behind, because, in communities of color, like in the Mission, yes, we might shut down, but I don't have access to some investors that I could put together and, back my next concept, so we have to make sure the government and our city agencies are moving with a cultural and socioeconomic lens in everything we do and everything that was just mentioned in this panel. And I really do. I'm not naive, right? I grew up in the Mission in the 80s, but I do feel like the mayor, she kind of gets it, right? She's a person of color, and she comes out to the events. She goes out lowriding and seeing the impact of the foot traffic and what it does in our community. So I'm not saying I'm naive, but I think, unfortunately, they're also dealing with the system, right? And to navigate. Prop H was a good effort. Church Space was a good effort. But I just want to make sure in all these good efforts that everything we do has an equitable lens, because trust me, there's always unintended consequences, and we're the people of color is the one that pay the price, right? And we want to move forward. We want to be part of the new San Francisco. We don't want to be like, oh, remember when San Francisco was this? Remember the Mission? No, I want to be a part. My community wants to be a part of the success of the city. So like everything the panelists just said, just with the lens of equity for people of color and communities of color.
So let me build on that. I mean, this was a question I actually had. It was the next question, but I'm going to take what you said and sort of build on that a bit more. So the question I had written down was, how do we ensure that communities that have been left out of the political decision-making process are included? But maybe let's expand that topic a little bit more, and let me talk about why, from my perspective, what I see in small business is somebody that moved to the city and was very poor when I moved here, and it took me maybe 15 years before I made more than minimum wage. One of the biggest barriers I see to being able to start a business is access to capital, obviously access to education. Clearly, if you don't speak the language, that's a major obstacle. And if you are a person of color, or you're in some other sort of disadvantaged community, that's one more obstacle. So you start stacking all these obstacles up, and it becomes very difficult to become a business owner. Yet owning a successful business is, in many ways, one of the best and cleanest and clearest paths to financial independence for many of these disadvantaged communities. So if they can make it past all these hurdles, now they have achieved financial stability, which of course means stability for the community. And our cultural districts are so important, not just as part of our cultural history and as part of our cultural heritage, but even just in a practical, pragmatic sense. Like, this is what people come to the city to want to visit. So I guess the question for me, and I'll start with you, William, and I'll just run counterclockwise this time. How do we bring in the people that have historically been left out of that process? Is it all just language outreach, or how do we include the people that have been left out of this conversation? How do we get them to engage as entrepreneurs and as small business owners, so that they can participate in this economy and compete and be competitive?
Thank you for setting that question. I think it's not an intent or not a spiritual change, because I think everybody from city hall to department heads, I think everybody wakes up with good intent. Nobody wakes up with this diabolical master plan, right? Like Mr. Burns, right? But it's seeing the other person's perspective, right? And we do have an infrastructure of amazing community benefit organizations and nonprofits in each sector of the city. And it's more of city agencies and city departments. It's not like the mayor. It's getting planning, it's getting SFMTA to work with community and plan with community, not come up with a project or legislation and not come into these communities of color, to the most vulnerable population, and say, hey, what's your perspective? How can we help? Because Sharky, you and I have had these conversations, and we love each other, but what worked for you won't work for me, and vice versa, right? But we have that dialogue, right? How can we have that dialogue at a city level, at a department level, at a legislation level, right? And it's very important, a cultural lens and a socio, because like even with like shared spaces, let's say, I love the program, I'm with the program, but have we really taken the time to like dissect it and how culturally appropriate it is in each neighborhood, right? And those are the things that, if we want our most vulnerable populations and businesses to thrive and succeed in this new recovery phase, we have to just always, have different perspectives and be okay with that. And sometimes the process isn't that fast, because we do have to take the time to reach out to communities and get their input and build with community.
Yeah. I think, how do you, what is the best way to start that process? And what's the difference between where we're at right now and where we could be in, say, 60 days? What is, because, the shared spaces legislation that's coming up really fast. How do we traverse that gap fairly quickly? Is it just working with Meta and Cayo de Cuatro and CCDC and having those conversations at the organization level, or is it actually, need to happen even more grassroots than that?
It's simpler than that. It's just don't already come up with a plan or a project or legislation and then mitigate after, right? Like, let's see the political outfall and just knock out, the political carnage that we can take over the legislation. It's, hey, let's build this legislation. Let's do this, infrastructure project at the ground level before you start. What happens is they bring legislation or projects and then just do mitigation after the fact, right? Like, what's the least political fallout that they can take, whatever is going forth. So that's not how it should be done. They should really partner at the beginning of the process. And I'm not saying it's going to be hunky-dory and rosy and we're going to agree, but at least if you're involved, that's community. That's involving community, right? That process is what we need to change.
All right. Cynthia, both you and William are on the equity working group with the Small Business Commission, and you've been doing amazing work. So I know you're going to have a perspective on this. How do we include the folks that haven't been included? What would you have to add to what William had to say?
I think William's absolutely right. I think we can't look at mitigation as the solution to equity. I think that is inequitable. I mean, the amount of time that it takes to fill out a grant application or to, do all these things after the fact is a tremendous burden to small businesses and to any community. I think rollout of different initiatives need to be in language. We need to put forth the resources to have, things translated and a really robust outreach into different languages, even the smallest ones, smallest ones meaning numerically, like in terms of representation. I think we need to have people seated at the table upon creation and not just like, exactly what William was saying in terms of like showing me what you've made and asking me for my approval. Like we can't, I don't want to see what you made and then go through and have to be like, none of this really works for me. The whole thing isn't even applicable to what I'm doing here, and I feel like that's kind of that seems to be kind of the process. And then, oftentimes it's kind of like, well, I asked people, or, I asked I talked to the cafe owner, or I talked to the whoever. It's like, instead of us not really understanding where this legislation or, this proposal is coming from, I think transparency is really important. I think it's important to have transparency throughout the entire process. Who did you talk to? Why are you coming up with these ideas? And then who do you plan to talk to? I think in the equity work that we're doing, one thing that I keep seeing is that transparency and equity really go hand in hand. I think when we don't know how decisions are made and when we don't know who's in that whole process, it really becomes, it becomes scary, I think, because it's like, is this really made with my best and, like my thoughts and needs in mind? So I think equity is a huge, it's a huge issue in terms of like, we keep talking about these unintended consequences that happen when we pass, pieces of legislation. And when you don't take the time to tee everything up properly and to be transparent and to, do the actual work of getting communities involved to begin with, to figure out what their needs are, then yeah, you're going to have unintended consequences. You're having the actual consequences that were actually quite intended. I mean, you're thinking I'm going to make it and then I'll fix it later. So I think that in essence is really, the crux of kind of what we're talking about when we talk about equity.
Right. So yeah, I agree with all of that. It's just ongoing work of building those bridges, establishing those communication lines. It's admittedly, I also get it from the policymaker side how challenging that is. There's 50,000 small businesses. How do you have conversations at the degree of granularity that people feel included? I've been on the wrong side of that too, where policymakers are passing stuff and you're like, why didn't you talk to me? And it's like, it's frustrating. But you guys are absolutely right. It's going to be hard to move forward if we can't build consensus first. So Desi, I know you do a lot of incredible work with Somos Pilipinas, which is one of our cultural districts. You do economic development. What's your perspective on this? How can we do better at bringing voices to the fore that historically get left out?
I just got to second what William was talking about. The planning needs to start with the community first, as opposed to just trying to figure out how to get them to fall in line with mitigation. I think that's key. That was kind of the struggle we had in developing Somos Pilipinas, is that our cultural district is vast, and the city, particularly OEWD, didn't realize how do we fit within their box of their investments with the Invest in Neighborhood or the mid-market initiatives. How do we fit into that grand scheme, and how could investments in our community then check off what they were trying to do? And that was a big struggle in the beginning, but I think we've kind of worked through those issues. And so kind of like looking ahead, like the whole game has changed for everybody with the pandemic. And I think, the city needs to take that step back and reevaluate. And I think they are doing it with the economic task force initiatives, but I'm not really seeing that community engagement that what William is talking about. Like, hey, we've got these task force initiatives and recommendations. Has OEWD now gone out to the communities, to their grantees, outside of like a 10-minute Zoom breakout on how do these strategies that these task forces have come up, do they align with what you need in your community? I haven't seen that yet.
That's really interesting. So I wonder if, so first of all, the 10-minute breakout really resonates with me. We've all been on those sessions where, you've made a brief introduction to each other. You spend 30 seconds talking about the topic. You've barely even just taken the lid off the bottle. And then, whoop, you're back in the main room now. And you haven't really made any forward progress. Understanding that there's so many people and so many businesses, and yet so few hours in the day and ability to sort of coordinate and simultaneously execute, right? Which is the second part of it. How can we be, and I'm sticking with you on this for a minute, Desi. How can we be smarter about this? Like, I'm listening to you talk about this and I'm thinking, is it a standing 1 hour meeting with say cultural district representatives? Is it en masse? Is it as one big group, or is it on an individual level? So like OEWD staff member has an hour-long meeting with Somos Pilipinas, and then Chinatown, and then the Mission, and so on. Or what's the hole here, and how can we fill that hole a little better than we're doing right now? What do you think?
I mean, I think that's a great suggestion of having like, a monthly standing meeting. I know right now, God, I feel like I'm shooting myself in the mouth, because I am like, a big recipient of OEWD support and MOHCD and whatnot. But, I got to be honest with our small business community. Like, there's a Game of Thrones happening in City Hall, and I don't know who's in charge at OEWD right now. I know that Ann Taper is the new interim director, and I did reach out. I was like, hey, let's sit down. Let's look at our strategies and see how things fit with the pandemic. And I haven't heard a beat.
I think Ann was, I'm not going to, obviously I can't speak for OEWD, but she is acting director. Kate Sophis is the new incoming director. So I think OEWD staff are obviously facilitating this conversation. So I think that that comment will resonate, but that's interesting on, having some sort of standing meeting. Certainly the commission can help advocate for that if you think that'll be helpful. And I think we need to think about other ways to sort of facilitate what William said about having those conversations at the initiation of as ideas are being crafted, and switching from collusion and switching to collusion and collaboration instead of post-fact mitigation. I really like that approach, and maybe that would deliver a higher success rate on some of our policies. Ben, sorry it's taken so long to get to you, but what's your take on this? How can we do a better job at including some of these folks that haven't been included? You're muted, Ben.
I was going to say, honestly, just listen to the other people on this chat. I'm not one, we try to strive for equity, and we try really hard in our businesses, but I'm a cis white male business owner in San Francisco. So I don't really feel like I have the authority to speak on this topic, and I shouldn't be. We need to listen to other people. I will just say one thing: if we make it impossible to open and operate a business in San Francisco, what's the point, right? For anybody, what's the point here? Right. So we can go throw money at it. We can go try to offer services that act as a permit expediter or this or that, but for what end? So that some poor person can pull their hair out every day and not be able to make it. And I mean, poor human being, not somebody of less means. I mean, like somebody who's just can't every single day can't make ends meet because the city makes it so impossible to run a small business. So the other thing I will say too, and I don't want to have a final word on this, but the city, everybody in City Hall pretends there's no money. There is a ton of money. This city's budget is larger than many, many countries on earth. And when they give you that, it's just a line of total unadulterated bullshit. It just means we're not fighting hard enough. When we hemorrhaged 200-something thousand jobs in the height of the pandemic, in the small business community, they voted without any reservations, just business as usual, to give $250 million of raises to city employees, right? So, that shows we can unlock those resources if we're organized.
Right. I mean, we are an important member of the community that's contributing to those resources. We're contributing to those funds that are being created. I'll say, like, from my perspective, my heart goes out to anybody that is trying to escape poverty and trying to escape, being caught at the very bottom on step 0 of that rat race. And so from my perspective, it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that anybody that wants to start, own, or operate a small business has the ability to do so. And when we make these systems harder, whether it's because the rules are obscure or obtuse, or because it's expensive, that just means that only the wealthy can play, only the well-educated can play, and that's what really gets under my skin. I feel like it should this economic opportunity should be available to anybody that wants to work for it. And obviously we have to do things to create equity, to give people that are disadvantaged by virtue of position, socioeconomic or otherwise, to give them that same opportunity that others have, but making it easier is critical. So we're at the top of the hour now. I am hearing from OAWD. We can go a little long. I thought this would be a good time if we could each maybe just 2 or 3 minutes give some closing thoughts. Fundamentally, if you had to say just a couple words to the small business community on how we move forward, how we advocate, how we organize, how do we make the city better for everybody that lives here? What's your message? Let's see. Desi, I'll start with you.
Oh, that's a tough one. My message is to be self-sustaining without city support. And that's the only way. The city will be there to help supplement, but you can't turn to the city for a rescue.
You have a whole nother minute and 45 seconds if you want to expand on that.
I really can't. I'm playing the pessimist. The flip side is that I partner with the city very closely, and I'm very fortunate that we have a city government that is completely progressive and has good intentions. It's just that there is a system that's built around it that makes it very, very difficult for small businesses to exist. So I see both sides of the coin, and been able to adapt in working with City Hall, but that adaptation doesn't work for small businesses. It works for community development.
So, I think you're right in that a business needs to be self-sustaining without external support. With that being said, I also think, also to your point, the city is perfectly capable of doing a pretty good job of getting in the way of that, of putting its thumb on the scales and making it harder. So, just a couple more seconds here. What do you think the city could do? Like, if you could just snap your fingers, what do you think the city could do to just get out of the way? Like, what, in your experience of operating a business, what did you find most threatening or problematic when working with the city?
Well, is that they're not entrepreneurs. They don't share the mindset. They need to be put in that place of vulnerability so that they can shift their mindset. So when they're put that sense of vulnerability that I gotta pay I gotta make payroll, I gotta pay this landlord, I gotta pay bills. It's a whole different mindset. And I think if the city were to walk in the shoes of entrepreneurs, I think we would be in a much better place.
That's a great message. And I think that's one we can take to the city. I agree with you on mindset. I think we started with an abundance mindset, and now we need to be in a hunger mindset. The city needs to be hungry for new business. And that's just a totally radically different approach. William, same question to you. What's your message to the small business community?
Well, you know me, Sharky, I'm optimistic always. I love San Francisco, born and raised. So San Francisco, best city ever. Today, tomorrow, that has been. We're always gonna survive. We're always gonna thrive. We gotta stay united. San Francisco has given people like me the opportunity to thrive. Immigrant born parents, a convicted felon, and here I am, a commissioner for the Office of Small Business, only in San Francisco. So be optimistic, because in San Francisco, we are progressive, we are inclusive, things can happen, you can affect change. It's possible only in San Francisco. And I'll even give you examples. Like, I work across the city in a lot of communities of color, and I want to give shout out specifically to Diana Ponce de Leon from OEWD, because in the Mission Corridor, she was our representative. She knew every single business, like they knew her one-on-one, right? And that's an example of how city and small business could collab and work together. And to Desi's point is, Deanna knew what was going on in each business in our corridor, right? Like whether they're having problems with the landlord, whether payroll, whether whatever it may be, right? And that's an example of how can I help. And even at a macro level, when Joaquin was the director, he got it, right? So I do want to highlight, when things work, we should like really run with that, right? Like, and the mayor was great. She trusted Joaquin and Diana's judgment. And that's when city government's working and working for us as it should be. So we should encourage, when we do get glimpses of when it works for small business, to magnify and to celebrate that, right? So I do want to like tell small businesses, we will get through this. We will get through this, because we are San Francisco, and San Francisco won't stop.
I love it. I appreciate you so much, William. Ben, what's your message to small business? How do we move forward?
So Desi mentioned a shift of mindset, and I think that's exactly right. And you commented on it. The city, throughout the history of the city, has looked at small businesses like part cash cow just a renewable resource they can constantly get more and more and more out of, whether it's increasing fees or taxes or, progressive measures that are trying to help others, but have unforeseen consequences. And they've seen them like a weed. Like, I literally had conversations 5 to 10 years ago with supervisors who said, what's the point if a small business goes out of business, another one's just going to pop up in its place, right? And then we've seen that is not the case anymore. And even before COVID, the vacancies were out of control. And I saw a lot of leaders who would point fingers at anything from landlords to state law to this and that, but would never take a look in the mirror as to what the city's policies from the last decade have done to our small business community, coupled with the changing economy. And so, we're not weeds. We don't just come back. We need to change the mindset so that they consider us to be more like bonsai trees. That's what I like to think of, like a very precious, very vulnerable thing that needs daily maintenance, and that you have to create all sorts of special conditions to keep. And I think it's important to do that because we are the spine. We are the heart of our communities. We employ directly from our communities. We have a light on. We know the names of the people that come to visit us. We know their children. We know their grandparents. We are the community of San Francisco. We're a part of it like nothing else. And we need to be treated with reverence and with very, very much care. I think it was the 1970s, there was a new movement that changed how people look at food in America. And, it came up in Berkeley, right, with Alice Waters in her restaurant. And we've seen that slow food or farm to table movement take over and become ever present across America. And, it didn't destroy factory farming and destroy that, but for conscientious people, it was a huge thing. And I think that's exactly what we need here. We need a small business movement where we're considered precious and where people go out of their way. They spend more money on farm to table food, right? Because they know it's better for them. So, they can go to a local store and buy their Mother's Day gifts. They can do this, but it's going to require change from the leadership, and it's going to require change from the consumer thought around it. But we can do this. I'm very, very optimistic, and it's already happening. I think COVID was a big wake-up call for everyone. So that's my 2 cents.
I love the bonsai tree analogy. I think that's so appropriate. It feels really right. I think something that gets lost is small businesses often are the social fabric of our communities. They catch the people that would not otherwise be caught. They help people get the help that they need. I've seen it, you've seen it, we've all seen it in our businesses where, there's somebody in the neighborhood that needs help or, is going through stuff, and it's through the small businesses that community is created. I think that's really thoughtful observation there. Cynthia, we're going to close on you. What is your message for small business community, and how do we move forward?
Well, I think, so many pieces of what we've talked about today, I think are really crucial for small businesses to, be able to envision a really bright future. I think one is I encourage all the small business owners who have just, the desire, not even the time. Nobody really has the time, but the time will come if you have that desire to use your voice and to, call in, write, talk to somebody. And at the very least to sign up for, the Office of Small Businesses email list, to be connected, like starts wherever it seems like the easiest for you right now, and just start on that path to get connected to the community and to get connected to something outside of your business, because that will eventually grow into a longer path for you. Things will open up. And I think, encouraging more representation. When we talk about equity, I think representation is important. That was something that I struggled with myself. I don't have time, I'm running a business, but the value of seeing somebody like me and then now, being me and doing this and saying these things is very important. And I think just being at the table is very important. So I encourage anybody who thinks they don't have time or can't do it, doesn't have the skills to just step up and try something. I think also, for our city leaders and the people who are really holding purse strings in our city to really trust us. We really cannot come out en masse, like in the thousands every day and march. We are busy like running these businesses. So if we tell you something, trust us, have basic respect and trust for the things that we see in our communities. If I'm telling you something, we don't need 20 other people to come and sign a petition for it. I am seeing this. And, I think we are all very well in touch with what's happening. I think also legislation in the future really needs to reflect, learned experiences and learned kind of, things from the past. Like basically, let's learn from the things that we've done in the past and not replicate them over and over and over again. Let's do better and do things that actually cultivate community. And I think small businesses and small business owners are, central to our small business and community corridors. That's what brings life into a community. I see that in our neighborhood, in the inner Richmond. I see that, throughout the city. Our small business community is important, and it should be, looked at, I think, separately from other things, because I feel like we are really central to all of what we need for the city to look better in the future. So I think, I'm excited for small businesses. I think hopefully we will see some new businesses coming out and, trying their hand at doing something amazing and innovative. But I do think that we still have room for leadership. We still have room for more voices, and we still have room for more people to do some really positive things. So please, come out and make your voice heard.
I think that's a really great point and note to end on. I know all of us are small business owners. None of us ever thought that we would be participating in government to the degree that we were. At least I certainly never did. I've never gotten the sense from talking to any of you that was a top priority in your lives. I don't think any of us were political science majors or really aspiring to be part of government. We just simply engaged with the process in an effort to make it better. And one step led to another. And so I would just encourage anybody that's watching to listen to what Cynthia just said. It really is up to all of us. And we do have within us and in our power the ability to make things dramatically better. So thank you, all of you, for coming. Thank you also to Desi. He had to leave. He had to go to a client meeting. We're in business. So appreciate you all spending your time with us. Appreciate all our listeners and viewers for coming and checking us out. And come and participate in our commission hearings. Ben's on the Entertainment Commission. William and Cynthia and myself are on the Small Business Commission. We love hearing your public comment. We love getting your feedback. There's opportunities here. I think we're all pretty optimistic about the work we can do going forward and how much better things can be. So it's on us now. Let's do that work. Thank you, everybody.